Welcome to the 1 Million Years of Joy podcast. I'm Dr. Andrea Benaker, your host, and my intention is to inspire you to find more joy in your life through the stories from our guests and the science on joy and purpose. Hassan, welcome. It's such a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you very much. The pleasure is mine. Thank you for inviting me for your podcast.
Hassan, I'd love to hear the pivotal moment that brought you to the point when you decided to become a medical doctor.
So, Andrea, at the age of 8, I had a traumatic event in my life where my 38-year-old father at that time was diagnosed with a critical heart condition, and he was set on a journey to Cleveland Clinic for an open heart surgery. That moment in particular made me feel very vulnerable as an 8-year-old. However, surprisingly, I accepted this as my divine destiny at that time. I still remember to that day his endless goodbye to me and the tears in his eyes as an affirmation of his unlikely return. Because at that time in the 80s, if you were to go for an open heart surgery, you're unlikely to return from a major surgery like this. It was like, to me at that moment, I felt like I would become an orphan, after my father's departure to the United States for an open heart surgery. I still remember to that day the feeling that I had after he left. I was filled with anger and self-blame. But that feeling, in fact, if anything, it was transformational for me because it filled me. It fueled me with a fire of endless desire for a search of purpose. So even though it was a negative impact in my life, however, I felt so motivated that I really need to know who I am and what would I want to do in my life. Luckily, my father have returned from his journey victorious after an open heart surgery, an impact that had a lifelong pressure on me or positivity on me. He actually defeated all the odds by his return and unearthed my true desire of becoming a medical doctor. And that really what have led me to decide that this is really what I would want to do. I want to become a hero like his savior at that time, Dr. Taylor, who actually became my aspiration for years to come.
How beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
And today, you have been an emergency doctor for the last 19 years. Tell us about that experience and why did you choose to go in this specific field of medicine? Because being in the emergency room every single day, there's a lot of adrenaline, a lot of stress that comes with it, but I imagine a lot of satisfaction as well. So tell us more about that specific choice that you made.
This choice was made based on my existential purpose that I pursued all of my life since the age of 8. And really when I was working in the emergency department, that actually have provided me with instant gratification by saving lives and easing pains. However, I want to tell you something. Despite that, I had those moments where my heart was filled with disappointment and pain every time I saw a patient in the emergency department with a heart attack, coming with a heart attack, or a newly diagnosed cancer. Those moments actually brought me back to my 8-year-old self and made me question my incomplete purpose. Even though the emergency department, to this day, I still enjoy a lot because, like I said, it does provide me with this instant gratification and feeling of joy and fulfillment of saving lives. However, on the other side, I do see those patients to this day that I wish if I could have done something earlier for them. But obviously, them being in the emerge, it's a different scenario and a different management.
Of course. So is that actually what led you to create your medical centers?
Exactly.
To be more in the preventive side?
That's exactly what led me to that. My exposure to my father's illness in my early life, going to medical school, and then actually doing breast cancer research at McGill here in Montreal for 2 years, Then after that, doing my family medicine residency, emergency medicine, practicing both emergency medicine and family medicine, have actually led me to believe that unfortunately our healthcare system, I would say not specifically relevant to just North America, Canada, and the United States. In the world, I think it's a worldwide phenomenon. It's somewhat fragmented and kind of dismissive and more of reactive to patient care as opposed to being proactive, holistic, preventative. And that's exactly what fueled my purpose to begin with, to become a doctor. My goal of becoming a doctor at the age of 8 was stemmed from, I want to save people's lives and I don't want anybody to suffer like what I suffered. I don't want people to reach a point where they get a heart attack. I want to prevent them, early detect their illnesses, and provide them with the care that they really need before getting there. So when you see a patient in an emergency department or in a practice where they already had a heart attack or cancer, unfortunately, it kind of you feel resentful that I wish if I could have something earlier to prevent them from getting there. And that's really what led me to come up with La Vie, which actually a name that we chose that represents our true values and purpose, because really the art of practicing medicine and caring for patients, it's more about holistic care as opposed to a pill for every ill, which I really don't endorse.
So in your practices, from what I understand, you're taking initiatives to prevent disease, but you're also focusing on the mind-body connection. Can you share more detail with us about that, please?
Yeah, that's what we call at La Vie impact. And impact stands for integrating the mind with the physical well-being into an action that lead to a meaningful longevity. Because over the years, I've seen patients who have the longevity, but they've lost the meaning of life and the purpose. They live the life in kind of vacuum, where they feel like worthless, meaningless, living this life, but they live day by day, even though they're still healthy. And the opposite is true. I've seen patients where they're fueled with passion and purpose. However, unfortunately, they've lost the physical aspect of well-being. So I think integrating both together is a paramount for a meaningful longevity. And that's what we really focus at La Vie. We have teams that integrate with each other and with our patients, where we work on the two aspects of meaningful longevity, which is the mind and the physical well-being.
Can you share a story with us about someone that you have drastically impacted their life as a result of either preventing disease or maybe identifying a specific problem early on?
We have several stories, but one that comes to my mind is a patient who presented to our practice, and he was seemingly a healthy individual, executive, leading a healthy life in terms of wellness, exercise, and a healthy diet. And to a certain degree, he was so skeptical of going through a wellness assessment. And in his particular case, every aspect of the blood test analysis, of like the diagnostic imaging were really normal. However, through a thorough medical exam, this particular patient had a prostate cancer that he didn't know about. And this could have only discovered by a thorough physical exam. So by focusing on all the aspects of well-being, and in particular in that particular gentleman, he had a normal PSA finding on the blood test, and he did not obviously have any symptoms. And like I said, to a point that he felt that he was questioning the value of going through a 5-hour wellness check. We were able to identify a prostate cancer that we early detected, and he received the right treatment for. Surprisingly, this patient became one of our patient ambassadors in terms of advocating for a model like this. And that's an example of someone who felt that he's healthy in all aspects of life and was questioning why would I would do a holistic wellness evaluation. But I really would like to share with you two impressive cases that resonates with me all of the time. It's a reflection of how credible and how important it is combining the mind and the physical well-being together to achieve a meaningful longevity and wellness. The first one I would like to share with you is a patient of mine who has been a patient for several years. Unfortunately, this patient had a very subtle numbness in his face. And at that time, he was seen at the emergency department, and he was told probably it's just a nerve irritation, no more than that. But obviously, our principles, the way how we practice is being proactive and assuming nothing until we're figuring out what is the root cause of the medical issue. And that's what we preach all of our staff and doctors, because the worst thing that you can tell patients coming to see you is probably it's nothing, when patients are entrusting you with their life. It's either you know what is the issue, or you investigate until you know what's the root cause of the issue, or you refer the patient to someone who would know what's the cause. The worst thing, and unfortunately it's a common practice in medicine, where doctors say, probably it's nothing, let's see how it goes in the next 6 months or so, and if something changed, then we'll reevaluate. That's a wrong way of practicing, in my opinion. That's what I believe in. So in that particular patient, I ended up sending the patient for an MRI, and unfortunately he had a very malignant form of brain cancer, and it was glioblastoma multiforme, with a rare chance of survival from this cancer. So obviously I sent the patient to the cancer team who investigated the patient further. And then, interestingly enough, I want to share with you this particular moment before even sending the patient to the cancer team. I sat down in my office, I remember that date very clearly, and I was sitting with this patient and said to him, listen, unfortunately I have a bad news here for you to disclose. You do have cancer in your brain, and that's why you have this numbness. The next thing that he said to me, well, you know what, I'm not ready to die yet. I have so many, he was in insurance business, he said, I have so many life insurances to close, and unless I close those life insurances, I would put those families in jeopardy. I was shocked about this, like you're talking to a patient who has counted days to live, and all what he's thinking about is closing those life insurance policies for those families to protect them. I did not question that much, and I said, okay, I hope you will be able to close all of those policies. And he said, what do I need to do to win some time so I can finish what I have started? I said, you're going to meet with the cancer team, they're going to guide you through all of the treatment, and hopefully they will help you further in terms of your expectations and so forth. To my surprise, this patient defeated a very rarely defeated cancer. And I was shocked and pleasantly surprised, and I was overwhelmed with the fact that he was able to do it. And I knew inside of me that if you have a true purpose in life, and if you have all the meanings, then you're likely to defeat anything in the world, including disease, any adversity. So I asked him, how did you do that? This is a rare cancer. And to this day, actually, he's still alive, and presented his case in my workshop in Dubai. And then surprisingly, after I returned from Dubai, he was at my clinic visiting, and I said, how are you doing? He said, like, thumb up, I'm still doing fine and everything's great. I asked him, how did you do this? He said, I'm going to tell you my life story. This is what happened to me. At the age of 15, my father died unexpectedly and left me, my mom, and my brother without any financial resources. We suffered a lot. My mother had to work several jobs to raise us. And at that moment, I decided that I'm not going to let anything like this to happen to anyone, ever. And I didn't know how until I went to university, and I decided that my true purpose is to protect families and the loved ones from something like this, from an adversity in life where they lose a loved one and they become abandoned financially. And in his case, it's financially for sure. I want to make sure that everyone is secure. That's what led me to this. So at that moment, I felt that if I die, those people will not have the right protection that I wanted to have for them. And that's why I was waking up every day and said, he happened to be a spiritual person, and prayed God and said, God, give me one more day. I need to finish my job that I started on this planet. And that's how he survived, because he had a true purpose, existential purpose of saving basically families, from adversities like this. The other impressive story that I had is a different story. I had a lady that was brought by her family to my clinic for an assessment like what we do, the same assessment, a wellness assessment, which is a 5-hour assessment. And the family brought this lady. She was a 48-year-old lady who recently lost her husband 3 months ago, prior to presenting to my clinic. And she started having a constellation of different symptoms. Her symptoms were extensive fatigue, shortness of breath, intermittent chest pain, swelling in her feet. She was seen by several doctors and diagnosed with depression or grief, was started on antidepressants, never felt any better. The family was really worried about her. And going into more details in her life dynamic and life story that I usually touch upon during my assessment by asking patients, what is your life like? Tell me more about you. I want to listen more about your story. Apparently, her husband was the love of her life. She met him when she was 13-year-old. And then at the age of 20, 21, she got married to him. He was a successful lawyer. And her life was all about her husband, all about his needs. She never had anything else, any passion, anything in life as a purpose other than a mortal purpose, which was her husband. And when he passed away, her existential purpose disappeared completely. Because unfortunately, her existential purpose was all about a person, And unfortunately, when he passed away, she lost all of her life meaning. So she developed a very rare disease, which is known and commonly missed, surprisingly. It's called the broken heart syndrome. I don't know if you heard about it.
Yes.
It's actually Takotsubo syndrome, the real name for it. But it really comes from a massive emotional feeling as a result of a major loss in life that actually triggers a cascade of reaction in your body and make your heart fail. So patients end up having a heart failure that potentially can die from it if it goes undetected. Luckily, this woman, listening to her whole entire story and connecting the fact that she has lost her true purpose, and as a result of that, she had a massive emotional loss that most likely have led to this constellation of symptoms, and her symptoms were real, not just depression or grief. I ended up sending her for an echocardiogram, and sure enough, an ultrasound of the heart, and sure enough, she had a heart failure and cardiomyopathy, we call it. After that, I ended up referring her to a cardiologist who started her on different medications, and I followed with her. And thanks God, she survived. But that shows you what is it like, to a certain degree, to live life without a true existential purpose that goes beyond a mortal loved one, and how is it like to not to have one.
Thank you so much for sharing beautiful stories. And on this last story that you have shared, what I find really interesting is that purpose cannot just be altruistic. There has to be that duality between
selfishness
and altruistic, as our friend Amar in the
Purpose book. Yeah, absolutely, 100%. You know, Andrea, this is something that I talk about all of the time to my patients. It's like you said, it's about selfishness and altruism and balancing both with each other. And interestingly enough, there is nothing wrong about doing altruistic things in life for a selfish reason too, for a reward, for a fulfillment. And I think that's the right way of doing it, because if you start doing altruistic things and you struggle and you suffer on the expense of your selfishness and your own self, then it's not right. And I think a lot of patients and people in general have a struggle balancing the both together. And that's where the mind comes into place in our impact. You know, I've read a very incredible book, and I'm sure that you may have read it too, Man's Search for Meaning, Frankl's book. It's an amazing book. It's a sensational book. I've read actually a couple of times, and I've learned a lot from it. The same thing, the Purposehood book by Ammar Sharani, our mutual friend, it have added a lot to my way of I see things in life and how I practice medicine actually. Because really practicing medicine is an art that should combine the holistic well-being, taking into account life as well, the other aspect of life, not just the being focused on the medical ailment, and like I said earlier, a pill for every ill.
I really love everything that you have shared, and this brings me to the current research we're doing on joy. We already have data on over 30 countries. And one of the core correlations that we have found is that individuals that have found their purpose actually have a much higher level of joy and life fulfillment. It's quite interesting. And this is across cultures, across generations, so irrespective of age. If you have found your purpose, it just has a hugely profound impact on people's lives. And the question that I wanted to ask you that's connected to this, to what extent from your experience and in having such a positive impact on so many patients' lives, what role in your view does, beyond purpose, but a joyful and a positive mindset, what role does that play in preventing or even curing disease?
I think it's critical. That's been heavily studied in research, and I'm sure that you know from your background that in pharmaceutical industry they always do a trial, placebo versus drug, and they found like a good number of patients that respond to placebo. And I really think the reason why those patients would respond, and I'm going to share other stories with you about like from the medical perspective, it's really because they believe that whatever they're taking is going to heal them, and they have sense of purpose. Similar to my patient that I shared with you, the one with glioblastoma multiforme that cured himself from cancer. I don't believe that the reason why he was cured from cancer is just because he took the chemo and radiation. I really think his sense of purposehood and fulfillment that he nourished within himself is the one that made him conquer his illness. And that goes the same for a lot of other medical illnesses. That's why we sometimes find certain patients after, for instance, major stroke where they become paralyzed. Certain patients, they can, with a positive motivation and the right mindset, again, that goes back to reason why they're living. You know, if they have really a strong reason for life and have a true purpose, that's when really they accelerate in terms of their healing, and sometimes they go back to completely normal as like before stroke. And some other patients, unfortunately, they continue to be paralyzed despite all the effort from like occupational health, physiotherapy, any motivation that they can get from other people. Unless they are motivated and unless they have sense of purpose and meaning in life, they wouldn't make it.
So talking about prevention that we spoke about also earlier, one research that I was reading in a fantastic book, which is called Immunity to Change, was highlighting actually how when certain individuals with heart conditions are told that they need to take certain actions, change their lifestyle to actually be able to live or they will die, the majority of them do not actually take that action, surprisingly. So I was curious to know, how do you, from a preventive mindset, how do you encourage some of your patients to actually embrace not only that joyful and positive mind, but also potentially change certain lifestyle choices that they're making that could be leading in the future maybe to certain health problems? And how do you bring greater empowerment to some of your patients?
Thank you very much for this question. It's very interesting because I come across it very frequently, of course, especially when you have a patient who's presenting after like certain tests that we've done, and it does show that, for instance, they have a blocked heart arteries and they really need to implement drastic changes in their lifestyle. and be compliant with certain medications so they can prevent themselves from a heart attack and reverse the damage. So my approach to that actually is by positively enforce them to think about why, that's how I call it, the why, and what for they want to have a healthy life. I think when they attach their why and what for with something that is valuable for their existence here on Earth or in the universe, then it becomes more meaningful for them to pursue it. And then my job, what I do once they figure out the why and what for, I help them to reach that moment of the why and what for. Once they reach that, I actually document it and I remind them of it all of the time. Every time I see them, for instance, like let's say if they have grandchildren, I say, do you remember what you told me? You want to see your grandchildren getting into university and having great grandchildren. I joke with them about it. Let's do that together. And then what I do, my job, I feel, once they find that, figure that out, is to help them how? By reinforcing them positively reinforcing the positive lifestyle changes. But the only way to do that is by embracing those habits through the time. Because we know that in order for any individual to change their habits, any habit, according to research, you need a minimum of 66 days, based on a research study that was done, which is very interesting, 66 days. So realizing that, what we do with our patients, we make sure that we follow up with them at regular intervals no matter what, to positively reinforce a good behavior and positively remind them about the why and what for that they come up with. So that's how we do it. And then we continue to monitor, and that will be the how part of our healthcare team.
I'm curious to get your view on specific realities behind the foods that we eat that may have microplastics, the products that we utilize on a daily basis. And as you know, there's many contaminants or chemicals that exist from the air to the things we eat, and that they're beginning to be connected to numerous health issues. What advice would you have for some of our audience listening that want to really take control outside of their purpose, outside of their mindset, to truly protect themselves from some of these things that they can easily find in a grocery store, in a pharmacy, and they may think it's healthy, but actually it may not necessarily be so.
So when it comes to pollution with plastic and other chemicals, it's very unfortunate because sometimes it's hard to control it because it's everywhere, even it's in the air. I think we both read probably the same study that was published on our forum or our group. It was a British study about the impact of microplastic in the air on people's lungs that can trigger lung cancer and different cancer. But also it goes beyond that, different chemicals that we ingest on a daily basis. It's a challenging. The way how I would see it, probably the best practice would be is to try to purchase, sometimes it's difficult of course, as much as possible organic food as opposed to non-organic, and make your food right from the scratch as opposed to buy your food pre-made. I think that would reduce the chances of being exposed to different preservatives, chemicals, and so forth. It is challenging because I found incidence of breast cancer, according to several research, have gone up due to plastic, also chemicals that are considered estrogen disruptors and can increase the risk of, in particular, among female patients for breast cancer. And actually for male patients, plastic can increase the risk of prostate cancer. We have also noticed a staggering decline in the age of puberty among female patients due to exposure to estrogen-like products, plus estrogen in the cow's milk. So the age of puberty has gone down in North America in particular, also in Europe. And that accounts for the exogenous estrogen and estrogen-like product that a lot of people are consuming on a daily basis. So unfortunately, I feel the best way is to cook everything from the scratch and also to try to buy as much organic food as possible.
Can you tell us your view about full body scan? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a challenging test to do, and I'm going to reflect on my views on that. In particular, it's becoming a lot more popular now to do a full body MRI, because MRI does not have any radiation, it's magnetic resonance, as opposed to full body CAT scan, which has obviously a lot of radiation. So the MRI have gained more popularity, but I honestly think it's the drive from the full body MRI is more financially driven as opposed to proactive preventative driven, and I'm going to explain to you why. Because when we order, as physicians, when we order a specific diagnostic imaging, in particular, let's talk about MRI, we have a question in mind for the radiologist, the doctor who reads or interprets the MRI. Question in mind, for instance, do you see a tumor? This patient has this particular symptoms and we're questioning that particular disease. Can you see it on an MRI? And that's a very good way of ordering those kind of tests to help us to reach a diagnosis or to rule out a specific diagnosis in mind. Whereas when you have patients doing a full body MRI, basically you're telling the radiologist, the expert, I don't know what I'm looking for, but try to find something in particular. And the analogy that the way how I look at it, it's similar to me walking into a room and someone is asking me, what do you think is wrong with this room? And I say to that person, oh, you know what, I think there's a crack on the wall. I'm not sure how important it is, but maybe keep an eye on it, measure it again in 3 to 4 months and see if that changes. But I really don't know if it's really important or relevant. I really see this dot there. I don't know if it's a defect in the paint or something like that. Maybe keep an eye on it, make sure that doesn't change. That's exactly what happens when you do a full body MRI. The radiologist will come back definitely with some findings, saying that I do see, for instance, an area on the brain or an area in the kidneys. I'm not sure how important it is. However, it could be cancer. I really don't know because you're not giving me any relevant history to correlate with. Probably repeat this test in 3 to 6 months. So imagine if someone now had an MRI and it has several non-specific findings, we call them. A nodule there, a lump there, a dot there, and now he has to live through this fear of one of those findings potentially could be cancer. And now we're repeating the MRI or the MRI in 3 to 6 months. It still hasn't changed, but probably it's best to repeat it again in a year. And a year later, we're still repeating it, it's still stable, but maybe it's better to repeat it in another year. Imagine what can happen to the patient's mental health if we were to do that. That's my challenge with those full body MRIs. So what I find honestly is more intriguing and where the science is heading in terms of early detection is what we call nowadays in medicine the liquid biopsy. I don't know if you heard about it. Liquid biopsy is basically detecting genetic expressions of active cancer in the bloodstream. So there are a couple of tests that are available. The science is still in the early stages, so that's why the sensitivity of those tests and specificity is still not as good. But over time, with more data compiled with different patients testing, we will reach a point where we will be able to fully rely on those tests. And what it's all about, instead of detecting a gene that a patient might have, and that create another problem, and what I tell patients usually when we do those genetic tests, when the patients come and insist, I want to do a full genetic test to see what kind of genetic defects I have, the next question I ask them, can you handle the truth? Because the problem with those genes, once you have them, what you're going to do about them? Because those genes are not necessarily that going to lead to cancer. If you have the gene, Potentially you can have cancer if this gene turns off and gets activated by different reasons, or you may live for the rest of your life without necessarily having cancer. So that's another challenging test. Unless you want to, there's an action by doing the test. For instance, I endorse this test if someone has a family history of breast cancer and they want to do BRCA1, BRCA2 gene because they want to make a decision of having prophylactic mastectomy, or like removing the breast and the ovaries to prevent themselves from imminent 50% chance of cancer lifetime. Then I understand that. That's a good test. However, the liquid biopsy offers active genetic expression of cancer in the bloodstream. We call it cell-free DNA particles, where we can detect DNA in the bloodstream that stem from cancer cells. And the other test is messenger RNA, the famous messenger RNA particles in the bloodstream that also can be reflective of cancer, active cancer. That one is great because if that turns positive, then now you use the MRI modality to target that particular organ that shows that you have activities there.
So Hassan, can you give us a few tips for our audience that is listening in terms of how they can elevate their joy while also living healthy and expanding their health span and really cultivating more joy in their life?
I truly think this stems from three fundamental activities, at least that's what I believe in. First is finding your true existential purpose, because that will provide you with more fulfillment and joy in life. That's what I believe. The other element is nourishing your relationships with your loved one, because that actually will lead to, again, more life rich in joy and meaning. The third item, and that comes from my personal story, is to embrace any catastrophic event in your life and look at them in a positive way and find the positivity within the life's adversity. I believe there is not a single negative event in our lives that doesn't have the positivity within it, into it. But our challenge as a human, we always focus on the negativity of the catastrophic event rather than benefiting from it by focusing on the positivity that can add, what we can learn from it. How can that become a catalyst for a positive change in our life?
Thank you. Because you have used the word catalyst, this is exactly my purpose, to be a catalyst of joy, not only for others, but also for myself. And it has actually emerged as a result of my adversities and the brain adventures, as I call them, that I've been experiencing over the last couple of years. So immense gratitude. It has been really a great pleasure to have you with us today. And it's a true gift.
Thank you very much for having me. It was like really an honor and a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.